Commander Vexthor of the Calarian Imperial Navy had seen many things in his 30 cycles of service. He had watched entire star systems burn under the might of their war fleets. He had seen the proud Zephyrian Empire crumble in mere solar rotations. He had witnessed the complete surrender of 12 different species who thought themselves mighty warriors. But nothing had prepared him for what he was seeing on the tactical display before him. The bridge of his flagship, the Doom's Herald, was eerily quiet except for the soft humming of the ship's systems. His crew, all seasoned veterans of countless campaigns, stared at their screens with expressions that ranged from confusion to growing unease. The silence stretched on until Lieutenant Kessare, finally, spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, the readings are confirmed. The human ship, it's not responding to any of our standard intimidation protocols." Vexthor's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the vessel that hung in space before them. It was smaller than his flagship, roughly half the size, and its design was unlike anything in their extensive military databases. Where Calarian ships were built like massive wedges of black metal bristling with weapons, this human vessel looked almost organic. Its hull curved and flowed like something grown rather than constructed, and its surface seemed to shimmer with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. "Have they responded to our surrender demands?" Vexthor asked, his clawed hands gripping the arms of his command chair. "No, sir. They've been completely silent for the past 3 standard hours. No communications, no weapons charging, no movement at all. They're just waiting." This was wrong. In all of Vexthor's experience, when faced with a Calarian battle fleet of 30 ships, inferior species did one of 3 things. They surrendered immediately, they attempted to flee, or they fought desperately before being destroyed. They didn't simply hang in space like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The humans were supposed to be easy prey. The intelligence reports had been clear about that. They were a young species, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel a few hundred rotations ago. They had no real military to speak of, no advanced weaponry, no shield technology that could stand against Calarian firepower. They should have been begging for mercy by now. "Sir," came another voice from the communications station. "We're receiving a transmission from the Grimspawn territories." Every being on the bridge went perfectly still. The Grimspawn were not a species anyone in the galaxy wanted to deal with. They were ancient, powerful, and utterly unpredictable. Some said they were the first species to achieve consciousness in this galaxy. Others claimed they weren't from this reality at all. What everyone agreed on was that crossing them was a form of suicide that made dying in battle look pleasant by comparison. "Put it through," Vexthor commanded, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that made several crew members take involuntary steps backward. The Grimspawn ambassador was tall and thin, with skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its face was a collection of angles that shouldn't have fit together, but somehow did, and when it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made their translation system struggle. "Calarian fleet," the being said, and even through the translators, there was something in its tone that made Vexthor's blood run cold. "You will withdraw from this system immediately." Vexthor forced himself to stand straighter. The Calarian Empire had not conquered half the galaxy by backing down from threats, even from the Grimspawn. "We are conducting military operations against a primitive species. This does not concern your people." The Grimspawn's expression didn't change, but the temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees. "You misunderstand your situation, Commander. The humans are under our protection. They are our friends." The word "friends" came out in the Grimspawn's native language, and their translators couldn't properly convert it. Instead, it came through as a series of harmonics that seemed to bypass their hearing entirely and resonate directly in their bones. Several junior officers actually whimpered at the sound. "That's impossible," Vexthor said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Humans are a primitive species. They've barely left their home system. How could they possibly be allied with the Grimspawn?" Your ignorance of the situation does not change its reality, the ambassador replied. Withdraw now, or face the consequences of harming those who enjoy our protection. The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Vexthor felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. The Grimspawn didn't make idle threats. They were one of the few species in the galaxy that the Calarian Empire actively avoided confronting. But retreat would mean admitting failure, and failure was not something the Empire tolerated in its commanders. Sir, Lieutenant Kessar said hesitantly, perhaps we should consider— No. Vexthor cut her off. I will not be intimidated by shadows and rumors. The humans are alone out here, far from any Grimspawn territory. There's no way they can respond in time to help. He turned to his tactical officer. Prepare the fleet for attack. We'll destroy the human ship and complete our mission before any Grimspawn vessels can arrive. Sir, I'm not sure that's— Execute the order. The tactical officer's hands moved reluctantly over his controls. Across the fleet, weapons systems began powering up, filling space with the familiar red glow of Calarian plasma cannons charging. Vexthor felt some of his confidence returning. Whatever game the Grimspawn were playing, they weren't here now. And one small human ship, no matter how strangely designed, couldn't stand against an entire battle fleet. But then something happened that made his confidence evaporate like morning mist. The human ship began to change. It started subtly at first. The shimmer across its hull intensified, and what had looked like decorative patterns began to move and shift. Then, the changes became more dramatic. Sections of the hull that had appeared solid suddenly opened like flower petals, revealing structures that definitely weren't human technology. The smooth curves of the ship's design began to reshape themselves, growing more angular, more aggressive, more alive. Commander, his sensor officer called out, and there was panic in the being's voice. I'm reading massive energy signatures from the human vessel. Power levels are, sir, they're off the scale. How is that possible? Their technology is primitive. Sir, I don't think this is human technology. The energy patterns, they match theoretical models of Grimspawn power systems. Vexthor stared at the screen as the truth began to dawn on him. The human ship wasn't just protected by the Grimspawn. It was equipped with their technology. Somehow, these primitive humans had earned not just the friendship of the most dangerous species in the galaxy, but access to their advanced systems as well. Sir, came a new voice from the communications station. We're being hailed by the human ship. Put it through. The screen changed to show the interior of what was unmistakably a human vessel. But the being who appeared on screen made Vexthor question everything he thought he knew about humans. The creature was tall for its species, with dark skin and eyes that seemed far too old for its apparently young face. It wore what looked like a simple uniform, but there were patterns woven into the fabric that hurt to look at directly, patterns that reminded him uncomfortably of Grimspawn designs. When the human spoke, its voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was something underneath it that made Vexthor's prey instincts scream warnings. Commander Vexthor, the human said, and the fact that it knew his name was disturbing enough. I'm Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth Vessel Friendships Bond. You've been asked to withdraw from this system. You're human, Vexthor said, as if stating the obvious could somehow make the situation make sense. Yes, I am. Does that surprise you? Your ship, the technology— Captain Chun smiled, and it was not a comforting expression. A gift from our friends. They've been very generous with us, just as we've been generous with them. What could humans possibly offer the Grimspawn? The human smile widened, showing white teeth that seemed much sharper than they should have been. That's an interesting question, Commander. Would you like me to show you? Before Vexthor could respond, something began happening to his fleet. Not an attack, exactly, but something far more unsettling. His ship's sensors began reporting impossible readings. Space around them seemed to be shifting. The stars in the background began moving in ways that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Sir, his navigation officer reported, and there was raw terror in the being's voice. Our position is changing. We're moving through space, but our engines aren't active. Something is pulling us. That's not possible. Sir, long-range sensors are detecting multiple contacts approaching at impossible speeds. They're coming from outside our reality. On the main screen, Captain Chun was still smiling. You see, Commander, the Grimspawn have been alone for a very long time. Ians, they're incredibly powerful, incredibly advanced, but also incredibly isolated. Most species fear them too much to even try to communicate properly. But humans were either too brave or too stupid to know when we should be afraid. Space around the Calarian fleet began to tear open like fabric being ripped apart. Through the tears came ships that defied description, vessels that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. Even looking at them directly caused physical pain, as if their optical receptors weren't designed to process what they were seeing. We offered them something they'd forgotten they wanted. Captain Chen continued. Friendship. Genuine, honest companionship. No fear, no worship, no hidden agendas. Just friendship. The first Grimspawn ship to fully emerge from the dimensional rift was the size of a small moon. Its surface writhed with patterns that seemed to extend into spaces that shouldn't exist, and when it moved, it left traces of itself behind like afterimages burned into reality. And in return, the human captain said, her voice now carrying harmonics that sounded disturbingly familiar, they taught us what friendship really means. They showed us what it means to have someone willing to reshape reality itself to protect you. Vexthor realized with growing horror that the human's eyes were no longer entirely human. There were depths in them that spoke of exposure to things beyond normal comprehension, changes that came from close contact with beings that existed partially outside normal space-time. Commander, his tactical officer whispered, I'm reading 17 Grimspawn vessels now. No, wait, 23. The numbers keep changing. They don't exist in linear time the way we do, Captain Chun explained helpfully. So, counting them is a bit tricky. But I can tell you that there are enough of them to turn your fleet into component atoms without breaking stride. The largest Grimspawn vessel was now close enough that its gravitational field was affecting the Calarian ships. Warning alarms began sounding as their formations were pulled apart by forces they couldn't resist. This is your final warning, Commander, the human said, and now her voice carried the full weight of Grimspawn authority. Withdraw from this system, and never threaten humanity again. My friends have very long memories, and they're quite creative when it comes to punishment. Vexthor looked around his bridge at his crew. These were hardened warriors who had faced death countless times without flinching. Now they were barely holding back panic. Several were openly weeping, and one had collapsed entirely, overwhelmed by the psychic pressure emanating from the Grimspawn vessels. Sir, Lieutenant Kessari said, her voice barely controlled, recommend immediate withdrawal. Vexthor wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, but the practical part of his mind was screaming at him to run. The Grimspawn weren't just protecting humanity. They were prepared to go to war for them. And judging by the casual way they were manipulating space-time around his fleet, it wouldn't be much of a war. All ships, he commanded, hating every word, begin immediate withdrawal from the system. Thank you, Commander, Captain Chen said, and her smile was genuinely warm now. Please pass along a message to your superiors. Humanity is no longer alone in this galaxy. We have friends now, very good friends, and we take care of each other. As the Calarian fleet began its retreat, Vexthor couldn't help but wonder what kind of species could befriend beings like the Grimspawn. What did it say about humans that they could look at the most terrifying entities in the galaxy and see potential friends rather than monsters to be feared? The last thing he saw before the jump to faster-than-light speed was the human ship changing again, its hull patterns shifting to match those of the Grimspawn vessels around it. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, a perfect fusion of human audacity and Grimspawn power. As his fleet fled through hyperspace, Vexthor realized that everything the Calarian Empire thought it knew about the galaxy had just changed. Humanity wasn't just another species to be conquered. They were something entirely new, something that could turn the most feared beings in existence into protective allies. And that thought terrified him more than any weapon ever could. The retreat back to Calarian space was conducted in complete silence. No one wanted to be the first to speak about what they had just witnessed. But Vexthor knew that this information would have to be reported to High Command eventually. The question was whether anyone would believe them. More importantly, he wondered what other surprises humanity might have in store for a galaxy that had grown comfortable with the idea that might made right. If they could befriend the Grimspawn, what other impossible alliances might they forge? As the Doom's Herald dropped out of hyperspace near the Calarian homeworld, Vexthor made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days before. He was going to recommend that the Calarian Empire leave humanity strictly alone. Some enemies were simply too dangerous to make, and any species that counted the Grimspawn as friends definitely fell into that category. But first, he had to convince his superiors that he wasn't suffering from some form of combat psychosis. And given what he had to tell them, that was going to be the hardest battle of his career. High Admiral Zefkar listened to Commander Vexthor's report in complete silence. The massive Calarian leader sat behind his desk of polished bone, his 4 eyes fixed unblinkingly on the commander who had just delivered the most disturbing intelligence briefing in the Empire's history. Around the room, other high-ranking officials maintained equally stoic expressions, but Vexthor could sense the tension radiating from them like heat from a forge. The silence stretched on for long moments after Vexthor finished speaking. Finally, High Admiral Zefkar leaned forward, his claws clicking against the surface of his desk. "You're telling me," he said in a voice like grinding stone, "that not only did you fail to destroy a single human vessel, but that you retreated from an inferior force because of Grimspawn interference. Sir, with respect, it wasn't just interference. The humans are allied with them. The ship we encountered was equipped with Grimspawn technology. The energy signatures were unmistakable." General Corthin, the Empire's chief military strategist, spoke up from his position near the tactical displays. "Commander, are you absolutely certain about these energy readings? Grimspawn technology is theoretical at best. We have no confirmed examples to compare against." Vexthor had expected this line of questioning. "Sir, I've included all sensor logs in my report. The power levels we detected were beyond anything in our databases. The ship itself underwent physical transformation that our science officers cannot explain. And the dimensional rifts." He paused, remembering the way reality had torn open like paper. Even thinking about it made his skin crawl. The dimensional rifts opened by the Grimspawn vessels were witnessed by my entire bridge crew. I have 17 independent corroborations of the events. 17 officers who were under extreme stress, General Corthin pointed out. Mass hallucination is not unknown in combat situations. "Sir, the sensor logs can be doctored or misinterpreted." Vexthor felt his control slipping. "Why would I fabricate a story that makes me look like a coward? If I wanted to lie about my failure, I would have invented a more honorable defeat." High Admiral Zefkar raised a hand for silence. "The commander makes a valid point. However, the implications of what you're suggesting are significant. If humanity truly has formed an alliance with the Grimspawn, it changes our entire strategic position in this sector." Intelligence Director Vashti stepped forward from the shadows where she had been silently observing. Her species was known for their analytical minds and complete lack of emotional expression, which made her next words all the more disturbing. "Our intelligence networks have reported unusual activity in sectors bordering Grimspawn territory over the past several rotations," she said. "Ships have been observed entering and leaving Grimspawn space that don't match any known vessel designs. When our agents attempted to investigate, they simply disappeared." "What do you mean, disappeared?" General Corthin demanded. "I mean they vanished without trace. No wreckage, no distress signals, no evidence they ever existed. It's as if they were erased from reality itself." The room fell silent again as the implication sank in. The Calarian Empire relied heavily on its intelligence network to maintain its dominance. The idea that entire operations could simply vanish was deeply unsettling. There's something else, Intelligence Director Vashti continued. We've detected unusual communication patterns between Earth and various points throughout the galaxy. The transmissions are heavily encrypted using mathematics that our best codebreakers can't even understand, let alone decrypt. The patterns suggest coordination on a massive scale. High Admiral Zeph Carr's expression darkened. Are you suggesting that humanity is building some sort of alliance network? I'm saying the evidence supports that possibility. And if Commander Vexthor's report is accurate, the Grimspawn are actively supporting these efforts. Chief Science Officer Ralmoth, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. His voice carried the weight of someone who had spent centuries studying the mysteries of the galaxy. Sirs, we may be looking at this from the wrong perspective. We've always assumed the Grimspawn were isolationists by choice. But what if they've simply been waiting for the right opportunity? What they've been looking for allies who meet some criteria we don't understand. What criteria could primitive humans possibly meet that advanced species like ourselves do not? General Corthan scoffed. Unknown. But consider this. Every species that has encountered the Grimspawn has responded with either fear or attempts at domination. We've tried to study them, conquer them, or avoid them entirely. But what if humans did something different? What if they simply offered friendship? The concept was so alien to Calarian thinking that several officers actually looked confused. The idea of approaching the most powerful beings in the galaxy with nothing but an offer of companionship seemed absurd. Sir, Vexthor interjected. The human captain said something that stuck with me. She claimed that humans offered the Grimspawn something they had forgotten they wanted. Genuine friendship without fear or hidden agendas. Ridiculous, General Corthan snorted. No species becomes dominant through friendship. Power respects only power. But what if that's where we've been wrong? Chief Science Officer Ralmoth mused. What if the Grimspawn became powerful precisely because they value different things than we do? What if their isolationism wasn't arrogance, but loneliness? High Admiral Zeph Carr stood abruptly, his massive form casting shadows across the room. This philosophical discussion is irrelevant. What matters is the strategic reality we now face. If the humans truly have Grimspawn backing, we cannot proceed with our expansion plans in their sector. Sir, General Corthan protested, we can't base major strategic decisions on one questionable encounter. I recommend we send a larger force to verify these claims. With respect, General, that would be remarkably stupid, Vexthor said, then immediately realized he had just insulted a superior officer. But the words were out, and he couldn't take them back. The room went dead quiet. General Corthan's eyes narrowed dangerously. Care to explain that comment, Commander? Vexthor straightened his shoulders. If he's on his career, he might as well do it properly. Sir, if my report is accurate, sending more ships against the humans would be tantamount to declaring war on the Grimspawn. And if my report is inaccurate, then I and my entire crew are suffering from the same delusion, which would indicate a serious problem with our military readiness that should be investigated before committing more resources. The logic was unassailable, and everyone in the room knew it. General Corthan's expression shifted from anger to grudging respect. The commander makes a valid point, High Admiral Zeph Carr admitted. We need more information before making any major decisions. Vashti, what assets do we have that can investigate this situation without risking direct confrontation? Limited options, sir. Our best intelligence operatives in that sector have gone dark, as I mentioned. But we do have some deep cover agents embedded in neutral trading stations. They might be able to gather information about human activities. Do it. I want everything we can learn about this supposed human Grimspawn alliance. Economic data, military intelligence, political analysis, everything. Sir, Chief Science Officer Ralmoth said, I would also recommend a comprehensive review of our existing knowledge about the Grimspawn. If we've misunderstood their motivations, we need to correct our analysis. Agreed. And I want our best xenopsychologists to analyze human behavior patterns. If they've somehow managed to befriend the Grimspawn, we need to understand how. As the meeting began to break up and various officials hurried off to implement their orders, High Admiral Zefkar called Vexthor aside. "Commander," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I believe your report. Not because I want to, but because the alternative explanations are worse." Vexthor frowned. "Worse how, sir? If you're lying, it means one of our most experienced commanders has suffered a complete psychological breakdown. If you're delusional, it means some unknown factor is causing mass hallucinations among our crews. If you're telling the truth, it means the strategic balance of power in this galaxy has fundamentally shifted. Of those options, I prefer the third, because it's the only one that gives us a clear course of action. Because it's the only one that doesn't require us to question the competence of our own forces," the High Admiral corrected. "We can adapt to new threats. We cannot adapt to our own people becoming unreliable." As Vexthor left the Admiral's office, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Calarian Empire was about to discover just how little they truly understood about the galaxy they thought they dominated. For centuries, they had expanded through superior firepower and tactical brilliance. Now, they were facing an enemy that didn't fight by any rules they understood. But more than that, they were facing the possibility that their entire worldview was wrong. The idea that the galaxy was a place where the strong dominated the weak had served them well. But what if strength wasn't just about weapons and armies? What if there were other forms of power they had never learned to recognize? As he made his way back to his quarters, Vexthor found himself thinking about Captain Shen's smile. There had been something genuinely warm about it, even as she casually threatened his entire fleet with annihilation. She had shown him mercy not because she feared him, but because she didn't need to fear him. The humans had found protectors so powerful that they could afford to be kind. The thought should have been infuriating. Instead, Vexthor found himself wondering what it would be like to live without constant fear of attack, without the need to maintain dominance through violence. What kind of civilization could humans build with a Grimspawn watching over them? And, more importantly, what other surprises might emerge from a galaxy where ancient powers were willing to share their strength with those who offered nothing but friendship in return? 3 days later, the first reports began coming in from their intelligence assets. The news was worse than anyone had imagined. The humans weren't just allied with the Grimspawn. They were actively recruiting other species into what they called the Friendship Coalition. Dozens of minor worlds had already joined, offering their unique skills and knowledge in exchange for protection and technological assistance. Even more disturbing, several major powers were quietly reaching out to human diplomats, apparently interested in learning more about this new approach to galactic politics. The humans were somehow accomplishing in months what the Calarian Empire had failed to do in centuries. They were uniting disparate species under a common cause. But the most shocking revelation came from an intelligence report filed by Agent Kessine from the Neutral Trading Station at Nexus Point. She had observed a meeting between human representatives and delegates from the Zephyrian Empire, the same proud warrior race that the Calarians had recently conquered. According to her report, the Zephyrians weren't just interested in alliance with the humans. They were interested in redemption. The humans had apparently offered to help them rebuild their civilization, but as partners rather than subjects. The Zephyrians, who had sworn vengeance against the Calarians even as their worlds burned, were considering putting aside their desire for revenge in favor of joining this new coalition of friends. When High Admiral Zefkar read that report, he realized that the Calarian Empire was no longer just facing a military threat. They were facing an entirely new form of conquest, one that turned enemies into allies and offered healing instead of domination. For the first time in his long military career, he wasn't sure if victory was even possible against an enemy like that. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the space station New Harmony, looking out at a sight that would have been impossible just 2 years ago. Ships from 17 different species hung in space around the massive station, their diverse designs creating a tapestry of technology and culture that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about interspecies relations. A Zephyrian cruiser, its golden hull gleaming with newly installed human-designed shield generators, drifted alongside a Grimspawn vessel whose very presence caused reality to shimmer around its edges. Smaller ships from the Kepler Mining Consortium shared docking bays with sleek Aquarian exploration vessels, while a massive Centauri transport ship slowly rotated to maintain artificial gravity for its passengers. What made the scene even more remarkable was the obvious cooperation between crews. Elena could see Zephyrian engineers working alongside human technicians to install new communication arrays. Aquarian scientists were sharing data with Grimspawn researchers, their water-breathing forms safely contained in environmental suits that somehow allowed them to interact with beings who existed partially outside normal space-time. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" said a voice behind her. Elena turned to see Captain Chen approaching. Her appearance subtly changed since their last meeting. The exposure to Grimspawn technology and philosophy was gradually altering her in ways that were both fascinating and slightly unsettling. Her eyes now held depths that seemed to extend beyond normal human perception, and when she moved, there were sometimes brief moments where she seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. "It's remarkable," Elena agreed. 2 years ago, half these species were at war with each other. Now, they're working together like they've been allies for centuries. "That's what happens when you remove fear from the equation," Chen said, joining her at the observation window. "Most conflicts in this galaxy stem from species being afraid of each other. Afraid of being conquered, afraid of losing resources, afraid of being seen as weak. But when you have friends powerful enough to protect you, fear becomes unnecessary." Elena nodded toward the Grimspawn vessel. "Are they really as powerful as the story suggests?" Chen's smile carried undertones that hadn't been there when she was fully human. "More powerful than the stories suggest. But that's not what makes them special. What makes them special is that they use that power to protect rather than conquer." "How did this all start, really?" "The official reports are clear enough, but I'd like to hear it from someone who was there." Chen was quiet for a moment, her enhanced vision apparently focused on something beyond the physical ships before them. "It started with a misunderstanding, actually. Our first exploration ship encountered what we thought was a derelict vessel in deep space. It turned out to be a Grimspawn scout ship that was sleeping, I suppose you'd call it. They exist in so many dimensions that they sometimes withdraw from our reality entirely." Elena listened intently as Chun continued her story. "When our engineer, Marcus Webb, tried to offer assistance to what he thought was a stranded vessel, he accidentally made contact with the Grimspawn pilot. Instead of being afraid or trying to exploit the situation, Marcus just talked to him, asked if he needed help, offered to share our food supplies. That's all. That's all. But you have to understand, the Grimspawn had been alone for millions of years. Every other species they encountered either fled in terror or would try to study them like specimens. Marcus was the first being in eons to simply offer friendship with no agenda." Elena shook her head in amazement. "And they responded to that. They were fascinated by it. Here was this primitive human engineer offering to help beings who could reshape reality with a thought. It was so unexpected, so genuinely innocent, that it broke through barriers that had existed for ages. And now we have all this." Elena gestured toward the fleet outside. "Now we have something unprecedented in galactic history. A coalition based on mutual support rather than mutual fear. Each species contributes what they're best at, and everyone benefits." As if summoned by their conversation, a new ship dropped out of hyperspace near the station. Elena recognized the design as Thracian, though it had been heavily modified with what looked like human and Grimspawn technology. "The Thracians are here," Elena observed. "I thought they were still considering membership. They've had a change of heart. Their homeworld was threatened by Calarian expansion fleets last week. When word got out, 3 different coalition species offered immediate assistance. The Thracians were impressed by the response. Elena watched as the Thracian ship was guided to a docking bay by a small human shuttle. Even from this distance, she could see the careful precision with which the operation was conducted, the obvious familiarity between crews of different species. The Calarians won't take this expansion of the coalition well, Elena noted. No, they won't. But that's their choice to make. We've offered them the same friendship we've offered everyone else. They've chosen to see it as a threat instead of an opportunity. Through the station's communication system, Elena could hear the welcome being broadcast to the incoming Thracian vessel. The message was delivered simultaneously in 17 different languages, a feat that would have required massive translation resources just a few years ago. Now, with Grimspawn linguistic technology and human adaptability, perfect communication between species was routine. Ambassador, came a new voice over the comm system. Your presence is requested in Conference Room 7. The Thracian delegation is ready to begin formal proceedings. Elena straightened her diplomatic uniform and prepared to witness history in the making. Each new species that joined the coalition brought unique perspectives and capabilities, expanding their collective knowledge and strength in ways that seemed to multiply exponentially. As they made their way through the station's corridors, Elena was struck by the casual interaction between species that had once been natural enemies. A group of Aquarian youngsters were playing some sort of three-dimensional game with human children, their different physiologies presenting no barrier to their friendship. Zephyrian warriors shared meals with Centauri traders, their conversations facilitated by translation devices that had become so advanced they captured emotional nuances along with literal meaning. This is what the galaxy could be like, Elena murmured. This is what the galaxy is becoming, Chun corrected. Species by species, world by world. Fear is losing its grip on our interactions. Conference Room 7 was a marvel of adaptive architecture. The space could modify itself to accommodate the environmental needs of different species, creating separate atmospheric zones while maintaining the ability for all participants to interact freely. As they entered, Elena saw the Thracian delegation already seated in their preferred low-gravity environment, while human and other representatives occupied standard atmospheric zones. At the far end of the room, in a section where space itself seemed slightly unstable, a Grimspawn observer maintained silent watch. The beings rarely participated directly in coalition politics, preferring to offer guidance when asked and protection when needed. Their mere presence, however, was often enough to encourage cooperation among species that might otherwise be suspicious of each other. The Thracian High Speaker rose to address the assembly. Her species was humanoid, but taller, with skin that changed color to reflect emotional states. Currently, she displayed the deep blue of gratitude mixed with the gold of hope. Honored representatives, she began, her voice carrying the musical quality typical of her people. The Thracian Republic comes before you not as supplicants seeking protection, but as beings who wish to contribute to something larger than ourselves. Elena settled into her chair, preparing to help facilitate another species' entry into the coalition. But as the High Speaker continued, she realized this wasn't going to be a routine admission. We bring more than our technology and resources, the High Speaker said. We bring intelligence about Calarian military movements that may be of vital importance to all coalition members. The atmosphere in the room shifted. While the coalition was fundamentally peaceful, they were not naive about the threats posed by aggressive expansionist empires like the Calarians. 3 days ago, the High Speaker continued, our intelligence services intercepted Calarian military communications discussing something called Operation Final Sweep. From what we could decipher, they're planning a massive military campaign designed to destroy the coalition before it can grow any stronger. Chin's expression hardened, and Elena noticed that the Grimspawn observer had suddenly become much more solid, as if it was focusing more of its attention on their reality. How massive? Chin asked. 7 full battle fleets, supported by specialized vessels designed to counter what they perceive as Grimspawn technology advantages. They appear to have spent considerable resources developing new weapons and defensive systems. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. 7 Calarian battle fleets represented enough firepower to devastate entire star systems. The Coalition had defensive capabilities thanks to Grimspawn protection, but they had never been tested against a full-scale military assault. When? Chen asked simply. Intelligence suggests they will move within the next 2 standard weeks. They believe that striking quickly will prevent the Coalition from coordinating an effective defense. The Grimspawn observer spoke for the first time, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond the merely physical. They're mistaken about the nature of our protection. Chen nodded. The Calarians still think in terms of conventional warfare. They don't understand what they're really challenging. Elena found herself thinking about the implications of what they had just heard. The Calarian Empire was preparing to declare war not just on humanity or even the Coalition, but on the Grimspawn themselves. It was a level of hubris that bordered on cosmic stupidity. What do we do? Elena asked. Chun turned to look directly at the Grimspawn observer. That depends on our friends. We've never asked them to fight a war for us. The Grimspawn's response was immediate. You have never needed to ask. Friendship means protection, and protection means whatever force is necessary to preserve those we care about. The High Speaker's skin shifted to a deep purple that Elena's translation implant indicated was profound awe. Are you saying the Grimspawn will go to war to protect the Coalition? War implies conflict between relative equals, the Grimspawn replied. This will be education. Elena wasn't sure whether to be relieved or terrified by that response. The casual confidence in the Grimspawn's tone suggested that they viewed the Calarian military threat as barely worth their attention. But it also meant that one of the galaxy's major powers was about to discover what happened when they challenged beings who could manipulate reality itself. There is another matter to consider, the High Speaker said. The Calarians are not acting alone. Our intelligence suggests they have formed a temporary alliance with the hegemony of worlds and the Stellar Confederacy. They believe that by coordinating their attacks, they can overwhelm even Grimspawn defenses. This news was even more disturbing. The hegemony and Confederacy were both major powers in their own right. Together with the Calarian Empire, they represented the largest military alliance the galaxy had seen in centuries. Chen's expression didn't change, but Elena noticed that her eyes briefly flashed with colors that definitely weren't human. How many species are we talking about? Approximately 40 member worlds contributing to the alliance, with combined military forces numbering in the millions of ships. The scale of the threat was staggering. Elena began to understand why the 3 major powers felt confident enough to challenge the Coalition. Numbers like that should have been overwhelming. But the Grimspawn observer simply said, interesting. It has been some time since we were required to demonstrate our capabilities on such a scale. Perhaps it is time for the galaxy to remember why we prefer peaceful solutions. Elena realized that they were about to witness something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just a war between different species or empires, but a confrontation between entirely different concepts of power itself. On one side, traditional military might backed by massive fleets and conventional weapons. On the other, beings whose understanding of physics allowed them to treat reality as a mutable suggestion. What do we do to prepare? Elena asked. Continue as we have, Chen replied. Build friendships, welcome new members, share knowledge and culture. The Coalition's strength has never been military. Our strength is that we've created something worth protecting. And if the Calarians and their allies refuse to see reason, the Grimspawn observer's form briefly flickered through several dimensions before stabilizing. Then they will learn that some things in this universe are not meant to be challenged. And the galaxy will have a very clear demonstration of why friendship is more powerful than fear. As the meeting continued with discussions of logistics and coordination, Elena found herself thinking about the broader implications of what was happening. The Coalition had grown from a simple friendship between humans and Grimspawn into something that was fundamentally changing the nature of galactic civilization. But now that change was about to be tested in the most definitive way possible. The old order, based on conquest and domination, was preparing to make a final stand against the new order of cooperation and mutual support. Elena had no doubt which side would ultimately prevail. The only question was how much of the galaxy would be transformed in the process. High Admiral Zeph Carr stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and surveyed the largest military force the Calarian Empire had ever assembled. Spread across 3 light years of space, 7 complete battle fleets moved in perfect formation toward their target. Each fleet contained over 2,000 ships, from massive dreadnoughts capable of cracking planets to swift fighter squadrons designed to overwhelm enemy defenses through sheer numbers. But the Calarian forces were not alone. The combined might of 3 galactic empires moved as one, their formations coordinated by years of joint planning and preparation. Hegemony of world ships, sleek and deadly, took up positions on the flanks. Stellar Confederacy vessels, built like mobile fortresses, formed the center of the advance. Together, they represented the accumulated military power of over 40 worlds and countless centuries of conquest. "Sir," reported his tactical officer, "final fleet position reports are coming in. All Allied forces are in position and ready to begin the assault." Zipkar nodded grimly. Operation Final Sweep had been 2 years in the making, ever since the first reports of the human Grimspawn alliance had reached the major powers. What had started as concern about a new political alliance had grown into fear about the fundamental stability of the existing galactic order. Status of our specialized weapons. All reality anchors are online and functioning within normal parameters. The dimensional stabilization fields are at maximum power. If the intelligence reports about Grimspawn capabilities are accurate, our modifications should prevent them from using their spatial manipulation abilities effectively. Zefkar hoped the modifications would work. The Alliance had spent enormous resources developing weapons and defenses specifically designed to counter what they understood of Grimspawn technology. Reality anchors to prevent dimensional manipulation, quantum disruptors to interfere with space-time distortion, and massive gravitational generators to lock entire regions of space into normal physics. "Sir," came another voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a transmission from the Coalition. It's coming from a space station they call New Harmony. Put it through." The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at what appeared to be a human female in a diplomatic uniform. But Zefkar's intelligence briefings had warned him about Ambassador Vasquez, and he could see the subtle signs of Grimspawn influence in her bearing. "Admiral Zefkar," she said, and her voice carried undertones that made his crew shift uncomfortably. "I'm Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Friendship Coalition. I'm authorized to offer you one final opportunity to reconsider your current course of action. Your concern for our welfare is noted, but unnecessary," Zefkar replied. "We are conducting legitimate military operations against a perceived threat to galactic stability. Admiral, you're about to attack friends who have done nothing to harm you. More than that, you're about to discover that the universe is larger and more complicated than you've allowed yourself to believe. Your threats do not impress us, Ambassador. We have taken precautions against your supposed technological advantages." Ambassador Vasquez's expression shifted to something that might have been pity. "Admiral, you still don't understand. This isn't about technology. This isn't about weapons or fleets or military tactics. This is about friendship and the lengths that true friends will go to protect each other. Pretty words, but this is still war." "No," admitted. "War implies conflict between opposing forces. What you're about to experience is something entirely different." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in silence. Zefkar felt a brief moment of unease, but pushed it aside. He had committed too much to this operation to allow doubt to undermine his resolve. "All ships begin final approach to Coalition space. Activate all countermeasures and prepare for engagement." The massive fleet began to move forward, their approach carefully coordinated to present overwhelming force at multiple points simultaneously. Intelligence had identified the locations of major coalition facilities and fleet concentrations, and the plan called for simultaneous strikes designed to cripple their ability to coordinate a response. But as they crossed into the outer boundary of coalition space, something began to go wrong. "Sir," the sensor officer reported, and there was confusion in his voice. "I'm reading massive gravitational anomalies throughout the target area. Space itself seems to be shifting. Elaborate. The normal stellar geography is changing. Stars are moving out of their expected positions, and new gravitational sources are appearing where nothing should exist." Zefkar felt a cold certainty settling in his stomach. "Are our reality anchors functioning?" "Yes, sir. All systems show green. But they don't seem to be having any effect on whatever is happening out there." On the tactical display, what had been a clearly mapped region of space was becoming something unrecognizable. Stars drifted from their positions like ships changing formation. New objects appeared from nowhere, massive structures that registered on their sensors as impossibly complex and utterly alien. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving multiple transmissions from Coalition space, but they're not coming from any ships or stations we can identify." "What are they saying?" It's an invitation, sir. Multiple species are inviting us to join them for what they call a friendship gathering. They're providing coordinates for a meeting location that didn't exist on our charts an hour ago." Before Zefkar could respond to that impossibility, space in front of the fleet began to change in ways that violated everything they thought they knew about physics. Reality folded in on itself like origami, creating structures that existed in too many dimensions to properly perceive. From these impossible geometries, ships began to emerge. But calling them ships was like calling a star a candle. These vessels defied classification, their forms shifting between configurations that suggested different purposes and capabilities. Some looked almost familiar, built along recognizable design principles, but enhanced beyond anything in their databases. Others were clearly alien, constructed using physics that shouldn't have been possible. And then came the Grimspawn. The first vessel to fully emerge into normal space was roughly the size of a small moon, its surface covered with patterns that seemed to extend into spaces that didn't exist. As it moved, it left trails of distorted space-time behind it, and when it came to a stop, reality around it simply accommodated its presence by reshaping itself. "Sir," the tactical officer whispered, "I count over 3,000 coalition vessels, and that's just the ones I can see clearly. Some of them seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, so getting an accurate count is impossible." But what was truly disturbing wasn't the number of ships or even their impossible designs. What was disturbing was that they weren't arranged in any kind of battle formation. Instead, they were positioned like hosts at a social gathering, ready to welcome guests. "Admiral," came Ambassador Visquez's voice over the communication system, though no ship was transmitting. "Welcome to Coalition space. As promised, we've arranged a demonstration of what friendship truly means." "This is still an invasion fleet," Zefkar said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "We are here to eliminate a threat to galactic stability." "Admiral, you're about to learn something that will change your entire understanding of stability. You're about to see what happens when someone threatens friends who have the power to reshape reality itself." The Grimspawn vessel began to move, and as it did, space around the Alliance fleet began to change. Not violently, not destructively, but with an inexorable certainty that was somehow more terrifying than any weapon. Gravity stopped working normally. Ships found themselves oriented in different directions relative to each other, their crews experiencing the disorienting sensation of standing on walls or ceilings. Navigation systems failed as the concept of direction became meaningless in space where up and down were matters of local preference. "Sir," the engineering officer reported, panic creeping into his voice, Our reality anchors aren't just failing, they're being incorporated into whatever is happening to space around us. It's like the Grimspawn are using our own countermeasures as part of their manipulation. Zefkar watched in horror as his carefully planned formation dissolved into chaos. Ships that had been arranged in perfect battle order were now scattered across impossible geometries, their relative positions no longer making sense in three-dimensional space. But none of the ships were being destroyed. None of the crews were being harmed. They were simply being rearranged. Admiral, Ambassador Vasquez said, and now her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. We want you to understand something important. Your ships are not in danger. Your crews are not being hurt. But you're no longer capable of conducting military operations against anyone. It was true. The Alliance fleet, despite maintaining all their weapons and defensive systems, had been rendered completely incapable of coordinated action. They existed in a space where normal tactics were meaningless, where the very concept of formation flying had become obsolete. This is impossible, Zefkar breathed. No, I admitted. This is friendship. This is what it looks like when someone threatens those we care about, and we decide to protect them without causing unnecessary harm. Around them, coalition ships began to move through the transformed space with casual ease, as if they were completely comfortable with physics that changed depending on local conditions. Human vessels flew alongside Grimspawn ships, their crews obviously adapted to operating in conditions that were driving Alliance personnel to the edge of panic. Ow! Zefkar asked, the question torn from him by the sheer impossibility of what he was witnessing. Because we learned to trust, Ambassador Vasquez replied. We learned that there are beings in this universe whose power is so vast that they can afford to be kind. And they taught us that true strength comes from using that power to protect rather than dominate. A new voice joined the conversation, carrying harmonics that bypassed their translation systems entirely and spoke directly to their minds. It was unmistakably Grimspawn, and when it spoke, several of Zefkar's crew members actually fell to their knees. Admiral, the voice said, you have learned to fear us, which was wise. But you have failed to learn that we have no desire to harm those who mean us no harm. Your species has always had the option of friendship. You chose to see us as enemies instead. We couldn't understand your intentions, Zefkar said, surprised that he was able to speak at all. Because you approached us with fear and suspicion. The humans approached us with curiosity and kindness. The difference in response should not surprise you. Around the Alliance fleet, space began to stabilize, but not in any way that restored their tactical situation. Instead, they found themselves arranged in a vast amphitheater of sorts, positioned so that every ship had a clear view of the coalition vessels and the massive Grimspawn vessel at the center. Now, Ambassador Vasquez said, we would like to show you what the coalition has accomplished, not through conquest or domination, but through cooperation and mutual support. What followed was a demonstration that redefined Zefkar's understanding of what was possible. Ships from dozens of different species worked together with an efficiency that surpassed anything the Alliance had ever achieved. Technologies that should have been incompatible were seamlessly integrated. Species that had been natural enemies for centuries collaborated as if they were members of the same family. Most remarkably, they watched as a badly damaged hegemony scout ship was welcomed into the demonstration area and immediately surrounded by coalition vessels offering assistance. No questions were asked about hostile intent or military affiliation. The ship needed help, so help was provided. That ship was part of your advance reconnaissance, Admiral Vasquez noted. It was damaged when it encountered one of our patrol groups. But we don't leave anyone in distress, regardless of their intentions. Zefkar watched as hegemony crew members were transferred to coalition medical facilities, while their ship was repaired using technology that was obviously far advanced beyond anything the Alliance possessed. The same crew members who had been gathering intelligence for a surprise attack were being treated as honored guests. This is unprecedented, Zefkar admitted. This is normal for us, Ambassador Vasquez replied. This is how we treat everyone who enters Coalition space, even those who come with hostile intentions. The Grimspawn voice spoke again. Admiral, we will now return your fleet to normal space. Your weapons and systems will function normally. You are free to attack us if you still believe that is necessary. Space around them shifted again, and suddenly the Alliance fleet found itself in familiar three-dimensional geometry. Their weapons were fully operational, their defensive systems at full power. They outnumbered the Coalition vessels significantly, and their combined firepower was enormous. But not a single ship moved to attack. Why? Zefkar asked, though he wasn't sure if he was asking the Coalition or his own forces. Because, Ambassador Vasquez said gently, you've just seen what friendship looks like. You've seen beings who could destroy your entire civilization without effort choose instead to offer help and healing. And now you have to decide what kind of galaxy you want to help create. Zefkar looked around his bridge at his crew. These were hardened warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds without hesitation. Now, they were staring at their weapon controls as if they were looking at poison. Sir, his tactical officer said quietly, I don't think I can order an attack against people who just demonstrated that kind of kindness. Neither can I, Zefkar admitted. The admission hung in the air for a long moment before the communications officer spoke up. Sir, we're receiving surrender requests from multiple ships in the fleet. Not surrender to the Coalition, but requests to surrender our hostile intentions. It was unprecedented. An entire military force was essentially asking permission to stop being an army. Admiral, Ambassador Vasquez said, the Coalition extend an invitation to any member of your fleet who would prefer cooperation to conquest. We have room for everyone, and we can find ways for all your species to contribute their unique strengths to something larger than themselves. Zefkar found himself thinking about what he had just witnessed. A civilization that had achieved power beyond imagination, but used it to heal rather than harm. A collection of species that had found strength in diversity rather than dominance. What happens to our empires, he asked. Our traditional ways of life. They change, Ambassador Vasquez said simply. But they don't disappear. They become part of something bigger and better. Your species' strengths and cultures are preserved, but redirected toward building rather than destroying. And if we refuse, then you go home, the Grimspawn voice said. And you remember what you saw here. And perhaps someday, when you're ready for friendship instead of conquest, you return. Zefkar realized that he was facing the most important decision of his career. He could maintain the old ways, the familiar patterns of dominance and submission that had defined galactic politics for millennia. Or he could step into something entirely new, something that offered the possibility of peace without weakness, strength without cruelty. Looking at his crew, seeing the hope that was beginning to replace fear in their eyes, he made his choice. Admiral Vasquez, he said formally, the Calarian Imperial Navy requests permission to discuss terms for joining the Friendship Coalition. The response came not in words, but in a wave of welcome that seemed to emanate from every coalition ship simultaneously. Space around them filled with messages of greeting in dozens of languages, invitations to cultural exchanges, offers of technological cooperation, and expressions of joy at the prospect of new friends. For the first time in his military career, High Admiral Zefkar felt what it was like to be welcomed instead of feared, and he realized that he never wanted to go back to the old way again. 6 months after the event that historians would later call the Great Welcoming, Ambassador Elena Vasquez found herself standing in a place that shouldn't have been able to exist. The Grand Assembly Hall of New Unity Station was a marvel of cooperative engineering that combined the architectural preferences and environmental needs of over 60 different species into a single, harmonious space. The station itself existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, allowing beings with radically different physical requirements to interact naturally. Aquarian delegates swam through specially designed water channels that flowed seamlessly between atmospheric zones where air-breathing species conducted their business. Crystalline entities that existed primarily as energy patterns communicated through harmonic resonances that translated into visible light displays for other species to read. And, overseeing it all, the Grimspawn maintained their gentle presence, their reality-altering abilities ensuring that every being present could participate fully in the proceedings regardless of their physical limitations. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" said a familiar voice. Elena turned to see High Admiral Zefkar approaching, though his title had changed along with his outlook. He now served as coordinator of peaceful exploration for the former Calarian territories, leading missions to discover new worlds to share rather than conquer. "It is," Elena agreed. "I sometimes can't believe how much has changed in such a short time." "Change was always possible," Zefkar replied, his once intimidating military bearing now relaxed and genuinely friendly. "We simply needed to learn that cooperation was more profitable than conquest." They were joined by Captain Sarah Chun, whose transformation from human to something beyond human classification was now complete. She existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions, her consciousness enhanced by millennia of Grimspawn knowledge, while retaining the essential humanity that had made the original contact possible. "The final vote tallies are in," Chen announced, her voice carrying harmonics that translated perfectly across species barriers. "The Galactic Friendship Charter has been approved by unanimous consent of all member species." Elena felt a surge of emotion at the news. The charter represented the formal establishment of a new form of galactic governance, one based on mutual support rather than dominance hierarchies. Every species that joined the coalition contributed their unique abilities and knowledge to the collective benefit, while retaining their individual cultures and autonomy. "How many worlds does that represent now?" Zefkar asked. 437 inhabited systems, Chen replied, including the 3 major empires and most of the minor powers. The only holdouts are a few isolated species that haven't been contacted yet, and the Draconian hegemony. The Draconians were the last major power refusing to join the coalition. Unlike the other empires, which had been convinced by demonstrations of the coalition's power and kindness, the Draconians remained committed to their traditional philosophy of conquest through superiority. They controlled roughly 50 systems in the far rim of the galaxy, and had so far refused all diplomatic contact. "What's the latest intelligence on Draconian activities?" Elena asked. "They're building something," Chun said, her expression growing serious. "Our Grimspawn friends have detected massive construction projects in deep Draconian space. Something that's designed to function as a weapon against beings who exist in multiple dimensions." Elena felt a chill. The Draconians were apparently the only species arrogant enough to continue planning attacks against the Grimspawn even after witnessing what had happened to the other major powers. "How concerned should we be?" Zefkar asked. "The Grimspawn aren't worried," Chen replied, "but they are interested. It's been a long time since anyone tried to develop weapons specifically designed to harm them. And they're curious to see if it's actually possible. From their perspective, it would be a fascinating scientific experiment." Elena shook her head at the casual way Chun discussed existential threats to reality-altering beings. But then, again, the Grimspawn's power was so vast that they could afford to be curious about attempts to harm them. It was like wondering if ants could develop weapons capable of threatening humans. "What do we do if the Draconians actually succeed in creating effective anti-Grimspawn weapons?" Elena asked. "Then, we defend our friends the same way they've defended us," Chen said simply. "The Coalition is more than just a collection of species under Grimspawn protection. We're a genuine alliance now, with our own capabilities and strengths." It was true. Over the past 6 months, the technological and cultural exchange between Coalition species had produced advances that none of them could have achieved alone. Human creativity, combined with Zephyrian engineering, had produced new forms of faster-than-light travel. Aquarian biological sciences merged with Centauri industrial processes had created self-repairing materials. Grimspawn dimensional technology integrated with dozens of different species innovations had resulted in tools and weapons that redefined what was possible. "The morning session is about to begin," announced a voice that seemed to come from the station itself. "All delegates, please take your positions." Elena made her way to the human delegations area, a section of the hall designed to accommodate Earth-normal atmospheric conditions while providing clear sight lines to all other species areas. Around the vast chamber, beings from across the galaxy were settling into their preferred environments. The Thracians occupied a low-gravity zone where their tall, graceful forms could move naturally. The Kepler Mining Consortium's representatives worked from high-pressure booths that simulated the crushing depths of their gas giant homes. Even species that had been discovered only weeks ago were present, their needs accommodated by the station's adaptive architecture. At the center of the chamber, in a space where reality itself was slightly unstable, the Grimspawn maintained their observer status. They rarely spoke during formal proceedings, but their presence ensured that all discussions remained focused on cooperative solutions rather than competitive ones. High Coordinator Veltar, the Zephyrian leader who had been elected to serve as the Coalition's primary administrator, called the session to order. The issues on today's agenda were typical of the new galaxy: resource-sharing agreements, cultural exchange programs, joint exploration missions, and technological development projects. But there was also the continuing question of what to do about the draconian hegemony. "Friends," High Coordinator Veltar began, her golden skin displaying the warm colors that indicated contentment and hope. "We must address the situation with our draconian neighbors. Intelligence reports suggest they are nearing completion of their mysterious weapons project." Elena listened as various delegates offered their perspectives on the draconian situation. Some advocated for preemptive diplomatic contact, hoping to convince them to abandon their hostile intentions. Others suggested that the Coalition should simply wait and see what the Draconians produced, confident that Grimspawn protection would prove adequate. But it was Captain Chun who offered the most interesting perspective. "Friends," she said, her voice carrying across all dimensional levels of the chamber, "I believe we may be approaching this situation incorrectly. The Draconians aren't really our enemies. They're the last representatives of the old galaxy, the old way of thinking. They represent fear, isolation, and the belief that strength comes from domination." She paused, her enhanced consciousness clearly processing information from sources beyond normal perception. "But they're also afraid, desperately afraid. Their entire worldview has been invalidated by our existence. Everything they believed about the nature of power and survival has been proven wrong. They're not building weapons because they're evil. They're building weapons because they're terrified." Elena found herself nodding. From that perspective, the draconian situation looked very different. They weren't dealing with an implacable enemy, but with a traumatized civilization that couldn't accept that the universe had fundamentally changed. "What do you suggest?" High Coordinator Veltar asked. "That we show them the same kindness we've shown everyone else. When their weapons are complete, and they inevitably test them against the Grimspawn, we respond not with retaliation, but with offers of help. We treat their fear with compassion instead of meeting their aggression with force." The Grimspawn observer spoke for the first time during the session, its voice carrying undertones of vast amusement. "The young ones continue to surprise us. Captain Chin's suggestion mirrors our own thinking precisely." "You're not concerned about draconian weapons?" Elena asked. "We are interested in them," the Grimspawn replied. "It has been millions of years since anyone attempted to create tools specifically designed to harm beings like ourselves. The engineering challenges alone are fascinating. But what if they succeed? Then we will learn something new about the nature of reality, which is always valuable. And the Draconians will learn that even weapons capable of harming us cannot make us their enemies if we choose to be their friends." Elena realized that she was witnessing the logical conclusion of the philosophy that had created the Coalition. Even in the face of weapons designed specifically to kill them, the Grimspawn's response was curiosity and compassion rather than fear or anger. So we wait. High Coordinator Veltar asked. We prepare, Chun corrected. We make sure that when the Draconians do test their weapons, we're ready to respond with friendship rather than fear. We show them that their choice to see us as enemies doesn't require us to see them as enemies in return. The rest of the session was spent developing what they called the Draconian Friendship Protocol. When the inevitable attack came, Coalition forces would respond not with military action, but with humanitarian aid. If Draconian weapons proved capable of harming Grimspawn, medical assistance would be offered. If their attacks caused damage to Coalition territory, reconstruction help would be provided. Most importantly, every Draconian act of aggression would be met with an invitation to join the Coalition as equal partners. Elena found herself thinking about how impossible this would have seemed just a year ago. The idea that a civilization would respond to military attack with offers of friendship violated every principle of traditional galactic politics. But traditional galactic politics had also produced endless cycles of war, conquest, and fear. The Coalition offered something different. The possibility that strength could be measured by how many friends you could make rather than how many enemies you could defeat. 3 weeks later, the Draconian weapons were tested. Elena was aboard the exploration vessel Harmony's Dream when the first reports came in. A massive Draconian fleet had emerged from their territory and launched a coordinated attack against 3 different Grimspawn vessels. The weapons they deployed were unlike anything in the galactic databases, designed to disrupt dimensional existence and force multidimensional beings into normal 3-dimensional space where they could be destroyed by conventional firepower. And they worked. For the first time in galactic history, Grimspawn vessels were not just damaged, but actually destroyed. 3 ancient beings who had existed since the galaxy was young were killed by weapons designed specifically to negate their reality-altering abilities. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see how the Coalition would respond to the first successful attack ever mounted against the Grimspawn. The response came within hours. Coalition medical ships were dispatched to the battle sites, offering assistance to any Draconian vessels that had been damaged in the engagement. Reconstruction fleets were sent to repair any collateral damage, and a formal diplomatic message was transmitted to the Draconian hegemony. Friends, your weapons have proven effective, and we mourn the loss of our Grimspawn companions. However, their deaths do not make you our enemies. We understand that you acted from fear and desperation, and we respond with compassion. The Coalition formally invites the Draconian hegemony to join us as equal partners in building a better galaxy. We harbor no resentment for your actions, and we offer our friendship freely and without conditions. The message was signed by every member species of the Coalition, including the Grimspawn survivors. Elena watched the news reports of Draconian reaction to the Coalition's response, and saw something she had never expected to see, an entire civilization beginning to cry. The Draconian High Command had prepared for retaliation, for war, for mutual destruction. They had not prepared for forgiveness. Within days, the first Draconian diplomatic ships were crossing into Coalition space, their crews bearing white banners that were the universal symbol of peaceful intent. Within weeks, formal negotiations had begun for Draconian membership in the Coalition. And within months, the last of the old empires had joined the new galaxy. Standing once again on the observation deck of New Unity Station, Elena watched as Draconian ships took up positions alongside vessels from dozens of other species. The sight still filled her with wonder. This impossible collection of beings who had learned to see each other as friends rather than threats. "It's remarkable, isn't it?" said a familiar voice. Elena turned to see one of the surviving Grimspawn approaching, its form more solid than usual as it focused its attention on their reality. "That they joined us?" Elena asked. "Yes, it is. That they killed 3 of us, and we still wanted to be their friends," the Grimspawn corrected. "Even we did not expect our response to surprise us so much." "Do you regret the offer of friendship?" "Regret." The concept seemed to puzzle the ancient being. We learned something valuable about the nature of our own character. We discovered that our commitment to friendship extends even to those who harm us. That knowledge is worth far more than the lives that were lost. Elena found herself thinking about the galaxy that had emerged from humanity's first contact with the Grimspawn. It was a place where ancient enemies had become close allies, where diversity was celebrated rather than feared, where the response to aggression was compassion rather than retaliation. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still problems to solve, still species that had to be convinced that cooperation was better than conquest.